Okay, so welcome back. Again, my name is Mr. Brown, and we're going to be continuing in regards to our Chapter 14 Men's Hair Cutting PowerPoint. So where we left off, we talked about the consultation, different reference points on the head, and so forth. But now we're going to start to dig a little bit deeper as we go forward into this chapter. Again, you can use your Chapter 14 in your Milady textbook as a reference as we go through some of these different points. So now we're going to continue where we left off. We're going to talk about tapering and blending different areas of the head. So we talked about how tapering is very important because when you go to take your state board exam, you're going to have to use different tapering techniques. You're going to have to do tapering techniques with a guard at some point on the head and without a guard on other parts of the head. So being able to taper not only with just the clipper with no guard, the clipper with the guard, the clipper with just the comb, using your shear and your comb technique is definitely something that's going to be very important. So as we continue talking about this, it mentions that tapering areas of the haircut that are determined by the kind of style that the client wants, whether it's a longer hairstyle, medium, or short. And then again, that is dictated based on your client consultation. So as we continue on, it talks about the different design elements used in the hair cutting techniques. So as we spoke about in our first PowerPoint presentation, our first slide about this chapter, we're not going to go one by one with each of these topics, but we're just going to kind of scroll through and just highlight some in particular. So we talked about the design, the line, also to recognizing horizontal lines. Now horizontal lines are obviously based on the horizon. When you see the horizon, it goes across. Vertical lines are obviously up and down. And the reason that lines are important in cutting is because when it comes to cutting the hair, you're going to have to make sure that you are holding the hair at the correct angle when you are doing any type of cutting with your shear and your comb techniques. It also starts to talk about some other different points: diagonal lines, curved lines, the head form, different proportion, balance. These are all, again, terms that we use as professionals when it comes to dealing with our clients and their needs. Now, just to highlight one of these in particular, the balance. Now, it's defined as the equal or the appropriate proportions that create symmetry and harmony in the design. Now, why is that important? You want to make sure that every single one of your haircuts is symmetrical. That means that it is well balanced. In terms of using the word harmony, if you, as an example, say for instance, when you've ever heard a band play, and for some of you who may have actually been in a band before, the way that it would work is when you practice, you'll have the horns, the saxophones, the flutes, the violins, the drums. And as you practice, sometimes the conductor will stop because they can hear that something's off. And what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, trumpets, you play your part, and the trumpets will play. And the saxophones, you play your part, and the saxophones will play. And then the flutes will play their part, and the flutes will play. And by hearing them individually, sometimes they can find out where there's one particular group that might be out of harmony with the rest. Perhaps the flutes aren't playing their part just right, or perhaps the trumpets are just a little bit off key. So by then being able to tweak that individual section, she can help to get the whole orchestra or the whole band back in harmony with each other, so that they create a nice sound. So in a similar way, when it comes to your haircuts, you have to make sure that you are creating a symmetry, a harmony with the whole haircut. Sometimes it may require cutting the hair a little bit differently on one side than the next based on how the hair or the growth pattern is. But ultimately, that's always our goal. No haircuts are always cut exactly the same. Not one is ever the same to another. So ultimately, your goal is with each haircut, you want to create that symmetry, that balance. Okay. Some more technical terms: the space, the design, texture, and so forth. As we continue to move along, it talks about more terminology when it comes to hair cutting and styling. Angles. Angles are very, very important. The definition of an angle is the space between two lines that intersect at one given point. You're going to have to know different cutting angles when it comes to using your different tools and implements. What's the difference between cutting against the grain and with the grain? That's listed here as well. Cutting against the grain is cutting against the way the hair naturally grows. Cutting with the grain is cutting it with the way the hair grows. What are some different instances when you're going to have to cut with the grain or against the grain? Well, that's why you're studying. That's why you're here, is because as you dig deeper into your book and you dig deeper into your lab exercises that you're going to be having on your lab floor, you're going to be able to see the difference between cutting against the grain or cutting with the grain, when you can do it and perhaps when you really shouldn't. It also mentions some other points: cutting across the grain, cutting hair with a circular motion. This is actually something that's underrated, because a lot of times you'll have to notice this when you cut certain haircuts, where a lot of times as beginners you might just think, okay, well, I just cut this way, up and down. But what if the hair is growing this way? If the hair is growing this way and you're cutting against it this way, are you actually cutting against it? Against it would actually be if you're cutting this way. Now, I know it's a little bit difficult to really understand that with me just using my hands and my fingers on a video or a webcam. But what this is ultimately showing is that when it comes to cutting the hair properly, you're gonna have to use a lot of different techniques, and there's never just one way to do it. One thing that I'll tell you from day one is, no matter where you're cutting, there's more than one way to be able to do a haircut, and you'll have one instructor that will show you one technique, another that will show you another, and another that will show you another. As long as the client gets what their desired outcome is, that's all that matters. That's all we care about. So, as a little slight review, let's ask a question. Now, this is going to be based on your studying, your preparation, your reading, and perhaps something that we talked about earlier on during this PowerPoint. So let's see. Let's go with, okay, this is a good one. This is going to be interesting. Okay. The blank bone protrudes at the base of the skull. The blank bone protrudes at the base of the skull. Your options are occipital bone, parietal bone, apex bone, or nape bone. Now, when I just said those options, the answer should have popped out, because we've accidentally talked about one bone thus far in either one of these PowerPoints. The answer is occipital bone. The occipital bone protrudes at the base of the skull. With that, we're going to close out this section of our PowerPoint for Men's Hair Cutting Chapter 14, and we will see you in our next